news stories that I want to get to today. And then I want to talk about something that I had seen talked about on a YouTube channel that I watched, Mr. Reagan. I watch him a lot. I highly suggest you check out his channel. Um, Very good, very funny, very smart, and just enjoyable to watch and learn a lot of new things. It's not your typical political commentation that you would get through like Michael Knowles or Ben Shapiro, people like that. But he does it a lot different. So it's not just like news that's going on or political events that are happening right now. These are other things that he'll dive into and expound upon. Really good stuff. But first, this first part is kind of heavy, um, just because there's a lot of it going on. And if you pay attention to the news, it almost seems like at least every other day you're hearing of shootings happening. Um, I don't remember shootings taking place as often as they have been in the last couple years, especially over the last year. And there's not a lot of coverage of any of these shootings unless they're mainly to feed the narrative of police killing unarmed black men. So the first shooting I'm going to talk about, it was a shooting that happened at an Albertville, Alabama. And there were 2 killed and 2 were injured. And then the suspect was found dead from self-inflicted gunshot. So this is from Fox News by Greg Norman. And it says, at least 2 people have been killed, and a suspect has reportedly been found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound on Tuesday morning following a workplace shooting in Alabama. The shooting unfolded around 2:30 a.m. at the Mueller Company plant in Albertville, leaving 2 others injured after an employee opened fire, the city's police chief, Jamie Smith, told CBS 42. Police are working to determine the identity of the shooter, but say that he has been located and that there is no further threat to the area. The individual had fled the scene in a vehicle, WAFF reported, and it's not immediately clear what led to the gunfire. Albertville Police Chief Jamie Smith told local news outlets that police found the suspect dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound inside a car in Guntersville, about 10 miles northwest of Albertville. Millions of fire hydrants have been manufactured at the plant where the shooting happened, according to CBS 42. Now, that's just a real quick story because there's not a whole lot of updates to this story. But I just realized, and I hope that y'all could hear me. My microphone was not turned up, so I hope that is not horrible sounding. I'll try and fix it when I edit. Anyway, so there's not a lot of update to this story, but I will follow it, and if anything major comes out of it, then I will update it again. The next shooting that happened, this was in Chicago, and the shooting victims included 3 mothers, 1 who was set to graduate. So it's 3 young Chicago moms are dead after an early morning shooting. This is also from Fox News, and this is written by Stephanie Pagones, or Pagones, I don't know, and Michael Ruiz. So, I hate these pop-ups. It says, a Chicago shooting left 3 moms and a man dead Tuesday morning, and 4 more people injured after gunfire erupted, according to city police. Several people were inside a home in the city's Inglewood neighborhood just before 5:45 a.m. when shots rang out, the Chicago Police Department said. Police said 4 people were pronounced dead at the scene, 3 women and a man. The Chicago Sun-Times identified 3 of the victims as Denise Mathis, a mother of 5 in her 30s, Shumetria Williams, a 19-year-old mom set to graduate from County Club Hills Tech and Trade Center Tuesday morning, and Blake Lee, a man who lived in the home. The remaining victims' names has not yet been released, but she reportedly had a 2-year-old daughter and also lived there. So Fox News tweeted out multiple people were shot Tuesday morning in the Inglewood neighborhood. The 4 other injured victims were rushed to area hospitals and in critical or unknown condition with injuries that included gunshot wounds to the head or back, police said. 3 of the surviving victims were men, including 2 who are 23 and 25 years old, respectively. The 4th victim is a woman whose age was not provided. A 2-year-old girl was also taken to a local hospital to be examined, though she did not have any apparent injuries, sources said. Police said they are still looking for the suspected gunman or gunmen. So we don't even know who it is, which is crazy, but it's also really sad. The biggest news story of shootings that the only place I have seen it covered and the only reason I heard about it was through Tucker Carlson. And I'm not surprised, and of course you'll see why I'm not surprised, because this goes against the narrative of the left, so of course they can't report on this story. So this is the Daily Caller. Suspect in multi-state shooting spree allegedly told police he was targeting white men. There you go. This is why it's not being covered. It is a racially motivated hate crime, but I don't feel like he's going to be charged with the hate crime once he's caught. I don't see it. I could be wrong. This article was written by Marlo Safi from the Daily Caller. It says, the man charged for allegedly wounding 5 people during a shooting spree in Alabama and Georgia told police that he was targeting white men, a detective said reportedly said in a Monday testimony. That is not correct grammar. A detective reportedly said. That's how they should have written that. Justin Tyron Roberts, 39, told police that white men had wronged him for his entire life, according to the detective. Quote, basically, he explained throughout his life, specifically white males had taken from him, and also what he described as military-looking white males had taken from him, end quote. Detective Brandon Lockhart said at a preliminary hearing, the Ledger-Inquirer reported. In Recorder's Court Monday, Detective Brandon Lockhart said that Roberts had an agenda against military-looking white males. So it says, Columbus Police Chief Freddie Blackman said all victims are expected to recover, according to the Associated Press. There was reportedly no evidence that Roberts knew any of the victims. Roberts was allegedly involved in 3 separate assaults Friday and Saturday in Columbus, Georgia, and Phoenix City, Alabama. He was in court for one of the shootings, which involved a man Roberts allegedly shot as the victim was getting into his vehicle in a parking area, according to police. Police found 6 shell casings at the scene of the shooting, and one of the bullets hit the victim's back. Roberts allegedly told the police, I had to have him. Roberts also reportedly claimed that white males were shooting at him in a wooded area with a slingshot, and the wounds had infected his skin. Police said they found no injuries on Roberts. Roberts was arrested about 2 hours after the shooting at a parking area. Police said they found a pistol that was stolen a few days earlier. So he also stole this weapon from somebody. Robin King, a public defender, asked the judge to order a mental health evaluation for Roberts after the officer's testimony indicted that Robert is having delusions and a disconnect from reality. The judge agreed to the evaluation for Roberts, according to the Ledger-Inquirer. Roberts was charged with using a gun to commit a crime and being a convicted felon with a firearm. Prosecutors argued that Roberts presented a public safety risk due to his priors and the alleged racial motives of the shootings. According to the Ledger-Inquirer, he is being held without bond. Well, good. He should be held without bond. And while I understand it's part of like the legal junk that people go through and that defenders will do, and they'll ask for these mental evaluations, I would have to say that, yeah, there's something definitely wrong with you if you can just go and shoot anybody, and I don't care racially motivated or not, just to be able to just shoot somebody for no reason. There's something wrong with you. But this is where I feel he's going to get some type of leniency, because they're going to say that he's mentally unstable. He like an insanity plea. And that's a very dangerous plea to allow people to claim. I understand, from my understanding, it's hard to use the insanity plea as a defense. It's not, people typically don't get that. They can use it, but it's usually denied and they have to withstand trial anyway, from my understanding. I could be wrong. So we obviously know the reason why this is not being shared in mainstream media outlets, and it's because it is a black suspect and he is racially motivated to shoot these white men. And it's terrible when people won't report on stories specifically because they don't like the story and they don't want to be honest. Reporting, journalism is supposed to be unbiased. Now, I understand in journalism, you obviously have some kind of bias, but you can still report the truth, even with a slight bias, and give all the facts. But this is so biased that they just bury it and they don't even talk about it. And I disagree with that wholeheartedly. I do not believe that that should happen. And this is why you have a lot of new media coming out, because they're willing to talk about, just like I am, all the stuff that mainstream media refuses to even acknowledge. So anytime that I can come across a news story that I would have missed had it not been for watching, a conservative outlet somewhere, I will always share it. And you may disagree with my opinion, and that's fine. Everyone has a right to disagree, but you also have a right to know what's going on. And the fact that they hide that from everybody, that's what irritates me the most. I didn't intend for that to be so quick, but because it was, I already had a couple of other stories lined up that we could talk about. There was another shooting, and I think you pronounce it Delcab, Georgia. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it or not. I'm totally butchering all of these words. If you're watching me type that. So this one here happened in Georgia. Yeah, in DeKalb. I spelled it wrong when I wrote it down. DeKalb Supermarket. And you may have heard about this. You may not have. This is from Fox News. This is written by Eric Perry. And it says, it's Decatur, Georgia. Law enforcement named the cashier killed in a deadly shooting Monday at a DeKalb County supermarket. Police said 41-year-old Lakita Willis was shot and killed following a dispute with a customer over a mask at Big Bear Supermarket in Decatur. Quote, "Our hearts and prayers go out to the Willis family, the injured sheriff's deputy, and everyone impacted by yesterday's senseless incident," a DeKalb County Police Department spokesperson said. Co-workers came to the supermarket Tuesday, the day following the shooting, leaving flowers in remembrance of Willis. One person at the store Tuesday said Willis was a longtime employee of about 10 years at Big Bear Supermarket. My sister was in the store yesterday. In fact, she was just 2 registers down, frequent customer Deborah Hunter said. I am devastated as to what happened in this community, customer Helen Mapp said. It was scary, fellow Big Bear employee Matthew Bowers said. It was Matthew Bowers' 3rd week on the job, and he works in the meat department. Bowers helped take customers to the back of the store in a refrigerator section during the shooting to safety. Bowers said during his short time at the store, Lakita Willis became a quick friend. She was the only person I knew, Bowers said. Authorities said the suspect, identified by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation as 30-year-old Victor Lee Tucker, was checking out when he got into an argument with the cashier, now identified as Willis, over the mask. He allegedly shot Willis after the argument. Sheriff Melody Maddox said 54-year-old Reserves Deputy Danny Jordan shot at Tucker, hitting him. Tucker returned fire and hit Jordan. Both were recovering at Atlanta area hospitals on Monday night. Maddox said Tuesday Jordan was in stable condition at Atlanta Medical Center after sustaining multiple gunshot injuries. There was some confrontation argument, I'm not sure exactly what, in reference to the wearing of masks, at which time the subject pulled out a weapon and shot the cashier. Maddox said at a news conference. Maddox said she did not know the details of the argument. Investigators said Tucker left the store without buying anything but came back inside, went up to the cashier, and opened fire. Tucker walked directly back to the cashier, pulled out a handgun, and shot her, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation wrote in the news release. Tucker then directed his fire at Jordan, who was working at a part-time security job at the store, investigators said. The deputy returned fire, investigators said, with both ended up being injured in the exchange of fire. That is what he's trained to do. That's part of his 30-year career in law enforcement, Maddox said. All of us here are trained to intervene and to respond. Fox 5 has learned Jordan is a veteran of the DeKalb County Police Department, where he served since 1998. He joined the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office Reserves until a unit in 2021. A second cashier was also grazed by a bullet, but was treated for her injuries at the scene. Tucker was taken into custody as investigators said he tried to crawl out the front door. The DeKalb County Police Department said warrants will be taken out for Tucker on charges of murder. Other charges are pending. The family of Lakita Willis has a GoFundMe set up to help with expenses. So if you want to go and check that out and donate, that's up to you. Lakita Willis, it's LAQUITTA Willis. In case you didn't know how to spell that. So that's just really sad. Our political leaders have made the mask such a religious, cult-like part of our lives, or some lives, that wearing it or not wearing it leads to these altercations that lead obviously to this kind of stuff, because they've created such this atmosphere around everything that's going on. They've caused people to be in such fear of not wearing one that they feel like they'll never be able to not wear one. And they've also created this atmosphere of people disagreeing with being forced to comply with things that the government has no right to force you into. And so they take that to the extreme. And so when you have two people taking this issue to the extreme on both ends, it can cause confrontations. And as we see, it can play out with somebody getting shot and killed. And I would say that this was not a good man. If it wasn't over a mask, he probably would have shot and killed somebody over something else. But if the government hadn't, this is partly the government's fault, creating this type of atmosphere around mask wearing and, getting the jab and around the virus. It's really crazy. So, as I'm sitting here talking about this story, I see a story pop up, and I'm kind of interested in it. It's not really anything, that I'm just curious about it. The title was Mother of Six Arrested After Leaving Children Unattended. So, things like that always bothers me, like leaving your children unattended. That really gets under my skin. So I saw that, and I thought, well, maybe we should read it. I don't know. This is by Deidre Dukes. It says this was in South Bolton, Georgia. Police body cameras captured the emotional scene as South Bolton police officers Corporal Garvin, Corporal Moore, and Captain McCain comforted a baby and her 5 siblings. The children, ranging in age from 2 months to 6 years old, were in distress, sweaty, and crying after Corporal Garvin discovered them alone in a running vehicle that was parked in the fire lane in front of the Walmart on Old National Highway at around 4:30 Sunday afternoon. The kids were scared when I approached the vehicle, said Corporal Garvin. They started screaming, yelling, and crying. They wanted their mommy, and mommy was nowhere to be found. She was in the store. The corporal put a call out for assistance. Corporal Moore and Captain McCain responded to the scene and immediately began caring for the children. The baby screaming in the front was only 2 months old, said Corporal Moore. So my first reaction from a mom's point of view was to grab the baby, comfort the baby, stop the baby from crying. You had customers coming out of the store concerned. They were giving water to the children. They were opening up water they had just bought from the store, said Captain McCain. Police said store surveillance video shows the children's mother, Shantricia Woods, was in the store about 15 minutes before returning to her car, where officers were waiting. She was taken into custody and charged with 6 counts of reckless conduct. Captain McCain is glad Corporal Garvin took quick action and reminds parents of the risk of leaving children unattended in vehicles, even for a short period. With all the slighter crimes going on at gas stations and also at the retail establishments, such as this, leaving your child for 1 minute, as you see with these sliders, as you are pumping gas, they drive off with the children in the car, the captain said. So being in the store for 16 minutes is way unacceptable. Woods was transported to the Fulton County Jail after the children were turned over to family members. Yeah, that's really dangerous when you think about it. That's very dangerous. I don't understand parents that do that. I really don't. And I don't think I ever will. And I think I don't know where your headspace is when you decide to leave your children alone in the car. I don't know where that comes from and what kind of mentality you have that you feel okay to do that. To me, it's strange behavior. But, I guess everybody's different. I wouldn't consider that different, but it is what it is, and it's really sad, but I'm glad the kids were okay. And, I don't know what kind of jail time that mother deserves, but she does deserve some kind of punishment because those kids were punished for 16 minutes. I couldn't imagine. That would be scary. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about, which is what I saw on Mr. Reagan's channel, and what he was explaining was like, you're like, it blows your mind when somebody talks about something from the past and it perfectly lines up to what's going on right now. And you're just like, oh my gosh. But if we had only known this existed, because I'd never heard of this. So Cloward-Piven. Okay, it's called the Cloward-Piven Strategy. And the question is from the Federalist Papers. Is it being used to destroy America? So, this is published by Steve Straub. In 1966, Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven Columbia University professors introduced a political strategy in an article entitled "The Weight of the Poor: A Strategy to End Poverty." The article outlined a strategy to overload the system and create so much poverty that the United States would become a social welfare state with economic and political power concentrated at the top with far fewer freedoms than we enjoy today. So this would be federal power only. No more local governments or state governments, federal government only, having all the power. According to Brandon Smith, writing at Zero Hedge, the Cloward-Piven strategy involves nothing less than an economic sabotage against the U.S. Now, this was written back at the time when they were trying to force America into a communistic society, but we cracked down on that as a country. We had no tolerance for communists in the country. So it says, theoretically, according to the doctrine, a condition of overwhelming tension and strain could be engineered through the overloading of American welfare rolls, thereby smothering the entitlement program structure at the state and local level. The implosion of welfare benefits would facilitate a massive spike in poverty and desperation, creating a financial crisis that would lead to an even greater cycle of demand for a fully socialized system. This desperation would then force the federal government to concentrate all welfare programs under one roof, nationalize and enforce a socialist ideology, and ultimately compact an immense level of power into the hands of a select few. Cloward and Piven claimed that this could be accomplished at a grassroots level through community activism and that it would facilitate a more compassionate federal authority. However, there are numerous problems with these assertions. The Cloward-Piven strategy has nothing to do with grassroots activism and accomplishes nothing tangible for the downtrodden poverty class. In fact, I would dare to say that Cloward and Piven, as well as most social engineers, are well aware that the concept ultimately only serves to give even more dominance to the establishment and pilfer even more freedom from the masses. Cloward-Piven is not limited to the destabilization of state and local welfare programs. It can easily be used against federal level entitlements, and in reality is much more effective against an entity with the proven tendency towards exponential debt spending. Though the federal government may be able to borrow fiat dollars through the Federal Reserve to prolong welfare rolls while the states cannot, a more volatile threat arises when debt monetization begins to wear down the purchasing power of the currency. Weakened purchasing power results in reduced consumer activity, less industrial growth, less GDP, and obviously more poverty. The dollar has lost approximately 98% of its purchasing power since 1972. And after 50 years of the so-called war on poverty, nearly one-third of American population now repeatedly slips under the official poverty line. In the past decade alone, the number of people dependent on food stamps and EBT for their survival in the U.S. has doubled from 25 million people to nearly 50 million people. Those who receive some kind of payment from the government, including those on Social Security, disability, and veterans benefits, are approximately 100 million. I wish they would have separated that because Social Security, that's money you pay in as you work that you recoup back when you retire. I don't feel like that should be included in that because it's not just money freely being given to you because you can't work. Anyway, continuing on. Americans on Social Security do not consider themselves welfare recipients because they paid into the system. However, the point remains that if the federal money tap shuts down due to overwhelming participation, the checks will stop whether you paid into the system or not. Oh, okay, I see why they said it now. In the end, it is the federal government itself that is most vulnerable to the Cloward-Piven strategy, and I believe the goal is to set fire to all social structures in the U.S., then assimilate them into a new globalist system. The tactic of overwhelming the welfare structure requires the complicity of the government itself. A grassroots activist movement cannot and will never compel federal and state governments to expand welfare initiatives if they do not wish to. If welfare programs are not expanded beyond their capacity to be maintained, they cannot be overwhelmed. Therefore, government must cooperate with the Cloward-Piven strategy by generating more and more welfare programs to be exploited. That is to say, the elitists who control our government, regardless of their claimed political party, must want to arrange circumstances to allow for Cloward-Piven to be successful. I will tell you that people who agree with the Cloward-Piven strategy, they also kind of follow the rules of Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals, and people who follow that book, Obama was big on Rules for Radicals, Hillary Clinton, and George Soros. It says that the Cloward-Piven strategy seeks to hasten the fall of capitalism by overloading the government bureaucracy with a flood of impossible demands, thus pushing society into crisis and economic collapse. Inspired by the August 1965 riots in the Black District of Watts in Los Angeles, which erupted after police had used batons to subdue a black man suspected of drunk driving, Cloward and Piven published an article titled The Weight of the Poor, A Strategy to End Poverty in the May 2, 1966 issue of The Nation. Following its publication, The Nation sold an unprecedented 30,000 reprints. Activists were abuzz over the so-called crisis strategy, or Cloward-Piven strategy, as it came to be called. Many were eager to put it into effect. In their 1966 article, Cloward and Piven charged that the ruling classes used welfare to weaken the poor, that by providing a social safety net, the rich doused the fires of rebellion. Poor people can advance only when the rest of society is afraid of them. Cloward told the New York Times on September 27, 1970, rather than placating the poor with government handouts, wrote Cloward and Piven, activists should work to sabotage and destroy the welfare system. The collapse of the welfare state would ignite a political and financial crisis that would rock the nation. Poor people would rise in revolt, only then would the rest of society accept their demands. The key to sparking this rebellion would be to expose the inadequacy of the welfare state. Cloward-Piven's early promoters cited radical organizer Saul Alinsky as their inspiration. Make the enemy live up to their own book of rules, Alinsky wrote in his 1972 book Rules for Radicals. When pressed to honor every word of every law and statute, every Judeo-Christian moral tenet, and every implicit promise of the liberal social contract, human agencies inevitably fall short. The system's failure to live up to its rulebook can then be used to discredit it altogether and to replace the capitalist rulebook with a socialist one. The authors noted that the number of Americans subsisting on welfare, about 8 million at the time, probably represented less than half the number who were technically eligible for full benefits. They proposed a massive drive to recruit the poor onto the welfare rolls. Cloward and Piven calculated that persuading even a fraction of potential welfare recipients to demand their entitlements would bankrupt the system. The result, they predicted, would be a profound financial and political crisis that would unleash powerful forces for major economic reform at the national level. Their article called for cadres of aggressive organizers to use demonstrations to create a climate of militancy. Now, you should start hearing familiarity. When I'm reading this, you should start picturing in your mind that you have seen this just recently. Intimidated by threats of black violence, politicians would appeal to the federal government for help. Carefully orchestrated media campaigns carried out by friendly left-wing journalists would float the idea of a federal program of income redistribution in the form of a guaranteed living income for all, working and non-working people alike. Local officials would clutch at this idea like drowning men to a lifeline. They would apply pressure on Washington to implement it. With every major city erupting into chaos, Washington would have to act. This was an example of what are commonly called Trojan horse movements, mass movements whose outward purpose seems to be providing material help to the downtrodden, but whose real objective is to draft poor people into service as revolutionary foot soldiers.
just the parallels. It really, it boils my blood that if you haven't figured out that this is a parallel of BLM and Antifa riots over the past year, that they are being told that what they're doing is to help them. However, they're just being used as foot soldiers for the radical left. It boils your blood. And the sad thing is that they don't even realize they're being used. Most of those people that are out there writing, they don't realize that they are just being manipulated and used. And when they're done with them, they'll get no help. That's what's sad. To mobilize poor people en masse to overwhelm government agencies with a flood of demands beyond the capacity of those agencies to meet, like unrealistic demands, or demands such as defund the police, those types of demands. The flood of demands was calculated to break the budget, jam the bureaucratic gears into gridlock, and bring the system crashing down. Fear, turmoil, violence, and economic collapse would accompany such a breakdown, providing perfect conditions for fostering radical change. That was the theory. I will tell you this. The one thing that the radical left didn't anticipate for was clearly that conservatives are not going to back down. You have conservative red states that do not put up with rioting, that will arrest you and throw you in jail immediately. Texas is one of them. I understand they did some of it in Austin, and they succeeded a little bit in McAllen and in Dallas. But for the most part, Texas has been pretty peaceful because we don't put up with that kind of stuff. We just don't. Cloward-Piven recruited a militant black organizer named George Wiley to lead their new movement. In the summer of 1967, Wiley founded the National Welfare Rights Organization, NWRO. His tactics closely followed the recommendations set out in Cloward-Piven's article. His followers invaded welfare offices across the United States, often violently, bullying social workers and loudly demanding every penny to which the law entitled them to. Right, such entitled people. By 1969, NWRO claimed a dues-paying membership of 22,500 families with 523 chapters across the nation. Regarding Wiley's tactics, the New York Times commented on September 27, 1970, quote, "There have been sit-ins in legislative chambers, including a United States Senate committee hearing, mass demonstrations of several thousand welfare recipients, school boycotts, picket lines, mounted police, tear gas, arrests, and on occasion, rock throwing, smashed glass doors, overturned desks, scattered papers, and ripped out phones. These methods proved effective. The flooding succeeded beyond Wiley's wildest dreams," writes Sol Stern in the City Journal. From 1965 to 1974, the number of single-parent households on welfare soared from 4.3 million to 10.8 million, despite mostly flush economic times. By the early 1970s, one person was on the welfare rolls in New York City for every two working in the city's private economy. As a direct result of its massive welfare spending, New York City was forced to declare bankruptcy in 1975. The entire state of New York nearly went down with it. The Cloward-Piven strategy had proved its effectiveness. But you got to remember, New York City is a Democrat-run state. Democrat-run state, Democrat-run city. That's probably closer to why it succeeded. The Cloward-Piven strategy depended on surprise. Once society recovered from the initial shock, the backlash began. New York's welfare crisis horrified America, giving rise to a reform movement which culminated in the end of welfare as we know it, the 1996 Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, which imposed time limits on federal welfare, along with strict eligibility and work requirements. Both Cloward-Piven attended the White House signing of the bill as guests of President Clinton. Of course they did. Most Americans to this day have never heard of Cloward-Piven. That's me. I'm 2 days old when I heard about it. But New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani attempted to expose them in the late 1990s. As his drive for welfare reform gained momentum, Giuliani accused the militant scholars by name, citing their 1966 manifesto as evidence that they had engaged in deliberate economic sabotage. This wasn't an accident, Giuliani charged in a 1997 speech. It wasn't an atmospheric thing. It wasn't supernatural. This is the result of policies and programs designed to have the maximum number of people get on welfare. Cloward and Piven never again revealed their intentions as candidly as they did in their 1966 article. Even so, their activism in subsequent years continued to rely on the tactic of overloading the system. When the public caught on to their welfare scheme, Cloward and Piven simply moved on, applying pressure to other sectors of the bureaucracy wherever they detected weakness. In 1982, partisans of the Cloward-Piven strategy founded a new voting rights movement, which purported to take up the unfinished work of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Like ACORN, the organization that spearheaded this campaign, the new voting rights movement was led by veterans of George Wiley's Welfare Rights Crusade. Its flagship organizations were Project Vote and Human Serve, both founded in 1982. Project Vote is an ACORN front group launched by former NWRO organizer and ACORN co-founder Zach Paulette. Paulette, I don't know how you say it. Human Serve was founded by Richard A. Cloward and Francis Fox Piven, along with a former NWRO organizer named Hulbert James. All three of these organizations, ACORN, Project Vote, and Human Serve, set to work lobbying energetically for the so-called motor voter law, which Bill Clinton ultimately signed in 1993. The motor voter bill is largely responsible for swamping the voter rolls with dead wood, invalid registrations signed in the name of deceased, ineligible, or non-existent people, thus opening the door to the unprecedented levels of voter fraud and voter disenfranchisement claims that followed in subsequent elections. The new Voting Rights Coalition combines mass voter registration drives, typically featuring high levels of fraud, with systematic intimidation of election officials in the form of frivolous lawsuits, unfounded charges of racism and disenfranchisement, and direct action, street protests, violent or otherwise. Just as they swamped America's welfare offices in the 1960s, Cloward and Piven devotees now seek to overwhelm the nation's understaffed and poorly policed electoral system. Their tactics set the stage for the Florida recount crisis of 2000 and have introduced a level of fear, tension, and foreboding to U.S. elections heretofore encountered mainly in third world countries. So, now we've seen parallels of the rioting and using the BLM and Antifa rioters as foot soldiers for their revolution. And now we see the voting rights, where they massively changed up how voting worked in 2020 because of the virus, and how they're demanding that there really shouldn't be any voting restrictions at all. And they're calling states that are implementing stricter voting laws racist. Seems similar? Seems a lot like it's me. Both the living wage and voting rights movement depend heavily on financial support from George Soros' Open Society Institute and his shadow party, through whose support the Cloward-Piven strategy continues to provide a blueprint for some of the most ambitious campaigns. And so it wasn't just the rioting and, the civil unrest and the demands and like the voting rights and things like that, and then the local and state governments just out of fear or whatever reason it is that they give in, and now they turn everything over to the federal government, and then the federal government is going to crack down and cut off your freedoms, and it's going to be a totalitarian dictatorship. That's what it would turn into. There was another article from the American Thinker that I had pulled up. It's called President Cloward and Vice President Piven. So we know that they're referring to former Vice President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So the funny part is it says, "Welcome to President Cloward and Vice President Piven," or vice versa for those who believe the current vice president is really in charge rather than the cognitively impaired president in name only. Cloward-Piven's objective is chaos and turmoil, or in their words, a massive drive to recruit the poor onto the welfare rolls. A federal program of income redistribution has become necessary to elevate the poor en masse from poverty. Is there any better recap of COVID, including lockdowns, closed businesses, schools, and churches requiring the ruling class spending trillions of dollars they don't have to rectify the damage and destruction unleashed by the same ruling class that now wants to correct it? The so-called stimulus is massive income redistribution from the producers to the non-producers who are in their situation either by choice or through the dictates of the ruling class and their decisions, which turn producers into non-producers. The stimulus will result in much of the middle class and states in general to further dependency on the federal government sustenance. In Cloward-Piven's terms, a crisis is a publicly visible disruption in some institutional sphere. How do they create such a crisis? Crisis can occur spontaneously, e.g. riots, or as the intended result of tactics of demonstration and protest which either generate institutional disruption or bring unrecognized disruption to public attention. Think of the George Floyd protests and riots, a convenient excuse for institutional disruption. Institutions of law and order suffer disruption, from calls to defund the police to blatant disregard for private property and businesses. A pre-planned riot at the Capitol on January 6 created a false panic and a rushed certification of electoral college votes without scrutiny or review. Congress rubber stamping a fraudulent election. It had the bonus of allowing a bogus impeachment of President Trump, kicking a man already down as a giant middle finger to Trump and his millions of supporters. Cloward-Piven did not begin with the Trump presidency, but during FDR's New Deal, then further codified in the 1960s when it was given a name. This included Medicare, Medicaid, and the Great Society welfare programs. New government agencies and bureaucracies choked innovation and economic growth. Ill-conceived and endless wars, expansion of food stamps, Medicaid, and other social welfare programs resulted in the majority of Americans receiving government benefits. A crisis led to each of these programs. Seniors and the poor unable to afford their medical care gave us Medicare and Medicaid. The government replacing stay-at-home fathers created the welfare state. A shortage of reliable Democrat voters was rectified by opening our borders to anyone, providing them with free benefits in exchange for not biting or voting against the hand that feeds them. Democrats offer programs unpopular and unappealing to the majority of Americans. Cloward-Piven is how they muscle their agenda through. It is their only strategy, accomplishing through chaos, fear, and coercion what is unreachable via the ballot box. Bringing down the current system provides an opportunity to remake American society into their idealized version of utopia, which in reality is the Soviet Union, Cuba, or China, with a small ruling class in charge and everyone else subservient. In other words, a real-life Hunger Games dystopian society. Yeah, so for people who don't know, utopia, it actually literally translates to no place. Just a thought, because a utopia doesn't exist. There's no place. Donald Trump was simply a speed bump on the Cloward-Piven Expressway. He was supposed to blow up the road to serfdom, but instead only slowed it down for a few years. The deep state won easily. I wonder if Trump even stood a chance. Did he simply provide an opportunity for the deep state to test their new strategies of weaponizing the government against political opponents and rigging elections to the point that they are irrelevant? Now we have rule, not by our elected representatives, but by a senile old man signing executive orders put in front of him, orders created by his puppet masters hiding behind the curtains. COVID restrictions and lockdowns created such economic carnage that an entirely new dependency class was born. Add to that tens of millions of illegal immigrants bringing dependency as well as potential health care concerns and costs and animosity toward the country paying all their bills, displacing American workers already struggling to regain their footing after COVID. Any resistance is met with protests and riots. Those who speak out may be canceled or worse. The media simply parrots the talking points of the ruling class, acting like court eunuchs for the ruling establishment. Massive income redistribution via government programs with attacks on the First and Second Amendments make it impossible for the people to push back, either verbally or physically, against a tyrannical government, all to supposedly end poverty by making everyone poor and calling it the middle class. Yeah, that's how you would do it. You wouldn't be in poverty if everybody made the same amount of money, but it's still poverty. So Universal income doesn't eliminate poverty, it simply expands it, but under a different name, something trendy like equity. Putting dog poop on a scoop of ice cream and calling it an ice cream sundae doesn't make it so, except in the eyes of the government that defines the acceptable terms. You can be sure that guaranteed annual income will simply create a subservient lower class, eager to vote for their paymasters each November as long as they keep dripping narcotic dollars into their wallets. Not enough to climb the economic ladder, but enough to keep them satisfied. The productive ones pulling on the economic oars will eventually tire from their efforts and take their guaranteed stipend and let someone else row the boat. Those in charge will live lavishly as they did in the capital city of the Hunger Games. Chaos and confusion, fear and uncertainty, and a never-ending stream, courtesy of the government, solved with executive orders by the same government, designed to fix the very problems they created. All of this is being ushered in under the whip of President Cloward and Vice President Piven, and it seems the entire ruling class, regardless of political party, has signed on. Yeah, it almost seems that way, doesn't it? Not everybody's involved, minus the handful that are really trying to fight for Americans. I highly suggest you go watch the Mr. Reagan video. He explains it a lot better than I ever could. And also just look into it because it's actually very interesting to read about this. And I do suggest you read Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals, not because you should do what it says, but because it is interesting. And to learn the tactics of how the left works is very beneficial to conservatives. You should know all of their playbook moves, read their playbook so you know what to expect and you're never given a surprise when something happens, if that makes sense. Yeah, it made sense. Of course it did. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this episode today, and seriously, go do some research and go look up this stuff for yourself. Like I said, it is very interesting. And I want to thank everybody for all the support that I've been getting. I really appreciate it. Please join me on my Facebook, Lauren Collins. I just gotta say something. Or you can email me, gotta say something 21@gmail.com. And if you want to just listen to the podcast only, you can find me on Spotify, Anchor, Pandora, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and there's several others as well. And also join my subreddit. Just gotta say something. That would be great. I would appreciate that. And eventually I will make a Twitter and an Instagram eventually. I don't have quite enough following yet to take the time to create multiple social media platforms, so we'll stick with what I got right now. And I would really appreciate it if you would please go check out the Scott Ford Show, check out Isaac Hayes at the Cajun Conservative and Brothers Just Searching, check out Christy at the Lennar Score and Christy's Closet, her YouTube channel, and TV's Rob is Unwoke. Really great people. Go subscribe and follow them. You're going to love them, I promise. And please like and subscribe to my channel. Leave me a comment if you would like to. And please share this video. I would greatly appreciate it. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I hope to see you back here tomorrow. Have a great day and God bless.